Let's start. It's 11:31, so 60 seconds late. We have two of our panelists on their way, but we will just accommodate them as they come in. Let me introduce first well, let's introduce ourselves first, I think. So let me introduce myself. I'm Vivek Menon. I'm the founder and executive director of the Wildlife Trust of India as a first hat. And I'm also on the council of the IUCN and chairing the Asian Elephant Specialist Group for the SSC. And as a fourth hat, I'm senior advisor to IFAW's president as well. Friends, we are here now to talk about biodiversity, talk about the elephant in the room, which often doesn't get into the climate negotiations and COPs. And to do this, to talk about protecting biodiversity being a critical tool for the impacts of climate change, and in fact, perhaps even in redressing climate change, we have at the moment two esteemed panelists with us. At my immediate left, we have John Scanlon, who is an expert on almost everything in law, environmental law, and one has known him wearing several hats in the UN, in UNEP, and for many years as Secretary General of CITES. And after he has demitted that office, heads the Elephant Protection Initiative, EPI, and is on the boards, I think, of several not-for-profit as well as commercial enterprises. And the latest thing I saw in his CV is that he is going to prevent the next pandemic from happening, as well being on the board of Lancet to do so as well. So a very, very experienced campaigner, lawyer, and an expert on environmental issues globally. To his left is Mr. Jamil Mandima, the Vice President for Global Conservation for IFAW. And Jamil started his work on the smallest fish in Lake Tanganyika, the sardine, I just got to know, the freshwater sardine. And what we know him for now is his work to try and protect the landscapes of one of the largest terrestrial beings on Earth, the African elephants. So that's quite a span that Jamil has done. He has worked in many capacities in Zimbabwe, where he's from originally, and now is in DC, having worked for the African Wildlife Foundation and now with IFAW. So here we have got two eminent people, a practitioner from the ground, so to speak, and an environmental lawyer who sets policy. So I think that's a good way to begin. And when we get our other two panelists into the room, I'll introduce them as they come in. So friends, to start off, I'm told Jamil has a PowerPoint. So my very first thing really is, why is biodiversity protection really critical for addressing climate change? We have heard that 50% of the world's GDP really is reliant on nature, right? We have heard that climate change will cause animals and plants of this world to go extinct, but equally that nature itself can be the harbinger of hope for acting as a carbon sink and or even more as intact natural ecosystems to act as reservoirs for carbon. So why is biodiversity protection critical for addressing climate change is my first question. But in that, I would like, Jamil, you to focus on the elephant. Start with the elephant in the room, which is biodiversity and climate change, and then go to the actual elephant and give an example, perhaps, of Southern Africa and the room to roam idea, philosophy, and project of IFAW.
So thank you, Vivek, and friends in the room and those online, greetings and welcome to this pertinent subject. So why biodiversity and climate change? I grew up knowing that the balance of nature is critical, and if the critters and the habitats they exist in are not balanced, the system, the clean air we need to breathe doesn't work well. The rain patterns don't work well, and everything else. And here we are now, many years later, we are struggling to resolve the climate issue. Yet we have nature, which we know, if utilized properly, can be a low-hanging fruit and an asset for us as a global community that we coexist with to resolve the climate issue. And it is for this reason that at International Fund for Animal Welfare, together with our partners, we strongly believe if we secure and protect the habitats where the iconic species like African elephants and many others, even in the oceans, are, monitor them well, ensure that there is harmonious coexistence with ourselves, we can resolve the climate issues in a big way. We have for many years talked about the role of carbon sequestrations, referring mostly to forests, to grasslands, to the soils, but often never talking about the actual animals. And we are here at this COP as an organization together with most of you in this room and our partners saying, let's not forget the role of animals as part of climate action. So I will now transition to saying Africa and Southern Africa and East Africa are endowed with the largest African savanna elephant species in the world. We have lost from millions before, and now we are at a paltry 450,000 elephants, and of those, 100,000 about are forest elephants. So savanna elephants, 350,000. That's a shame on us. Why? Because their habitat has shrunk significantly to about 30% of its original size. Why has that happened? Naturally, we have our quest for economic growth, which is needed and we should do. But honestly, as we do that, we can make it a win-win situation by ensuring we carve out the relevant habitats suitable for elephants and therefore other wildlife, while still being able to zone for other developments. So when we look at the designated habitats or parks, they are isolated, they are small islands surrounded by a sea of us, all kinds of developments, urbanization, mega infrastructure, and in the process, we have choked some of their movement routes. And because elephants in particular, which we are using as a flagship species because they shape these ecosystems, they move, and the parks are not fenced. They shouldn't be fenced. If they are fenced, they will break the fences, and it's not good for their viability. So they end up on communal lands. They end up on our farms, and there's conflict. So what have we done? We have identified through local knowledge from indigenous people that know where the elephants move through generation after generation. And then from our science through collaring, which we have done at IFAW over the past 20 plus years, we know where the elephants move, what we continue to call corridors. Just be sure it's not like literal, in the literal sense of a highway. But these are kind of the areas where elephants try to avoid human beings or any area of conflict. But because we are choking it, they've become narrower and narrower, and some of them are not functional anymore. So because of the combination of why nature is important and why ecosystems that are healthy are important, we have initiated a very ambitious program, what we call Room to Roam for elephants. And in a nutshell, what we are saying, let's build around the buy-in from the governments in the elephant home range areas that have defined what in Southern Africa are called trans-frontier conservation areas. And in East Africa, we call them transboundary areas, key landscape for conservation and development. And I just want to show you, I hope this will show, okay. So Room to Roam is essentially looking at this issue. I talked about some of the things on the text, I won't read that. So Southern Africa has several trans-frontier conservation areas. The Kavango-Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area is the largest in the world, and across the 5 countries in SADC, we have, in the latest, in that CASA census, 230 almost 1,000 elephants. That's a significant population, and they crisscross the 5 countries. They have no passports, and as they do that, they come across human beings. Unfortunately, some of it can be tragic. Lives are lost, people are injured, crops are damaged, etc. And we have also witnessed the killing of elephants through illegal off-take, wildlife crime, which we'll talk about a bit later. And when I talk of elephants, ladies and gentlemen, I'm covering the broad base of all wildlife species that are key. So as an organization, Room to Roam is intended to work with the variety of partners that includes all the governments, the local communities, and private sector and private landowners across the entirety of the African savanna elephants. But IFAW is working in 3 anchor landscapes. On the southern end, we are working in northwestern Zimbabwe, which is the CASA TFCA part of Southern Africa, working at the leisure of the invitation of the government of Zimbabwe with ZimParks and local communities in Hwange National Park and the surrounding areas. And that's an area which, if you look at the map, is the pointer working? Anyway, I hope you can contextualize it there. The pointer doesn't seem to be pointing to me. And then we're also working in central Malawi in a park called Kasungu National Park, which was defaulated to literally 50 elephants. But through law enforcement improvement, we have now been able to secure it, and we then moved some elephants from Liwonde to Kasungu to have a founder population that can be viable, and that's transboundary to eastern Zambia, Lukusuzi and Luambe National Park, and the game management areas there, part of the Luanga cluster of elephants. Then last but not least, further in East Africa, southern Kenya, around Amboseli National Park, and then the group ranches and community lands there, and then northern Tanzania. So those are the anchor landscapes for Room to Roam by IFAW on the ground. Very lean team, counting and working closely with the expertise from the mandated organizations from government, the local communities, and the chiefs. And what's our idea? We are negotiating and agreeing on securing safe passages for the elephants. And what's critical is the elephants are going out of these small parks. They end up on communal land, and there's conflict, which we know is a rising issue now with human-elephant conflict, human-wildlife conflict. So we have to deal with that. But another part is climate change. What I put there is basically a basic illustration of what we are witnessing from the climate models, where some areas where elephants are now are getting drier, there's water scarcity increasing, but there's suitable habitats elsewhere, which is not a park, which we need to secure in advance, because those areas are going to be wetter and can sustain elephants and therefore other wildlife. If we don't do it now as part of Room to Roam together, that land could be lost to other incompatible uses that are well intended for economic growth. But once you have lost it, you cannot rebuild elephant habitat. And I would say, without elephants, we won't have savannas. And we don't have savannas, all the things we talk about, whether it's carbon sequestration, we are basically losing it. So IFAW is looking at Room to Roam succeeding as a result of political buy-in, a local community buy-in. So indigenous people in local communities are key. We have gone ahead to work with traditional leaders network, all those chiefs and headmen around where we work. They come to the table, they tell us the issues from what the communities see, what they're grappling with, and we try to resolve that together. We are looking at issues around what does it mean for local communities in terms of livelihoods, in terms of well-being. And essentially, when we do Room to Roam, it's not just about the parks or wildlife alone and the habitats. It's about how it connects to build resilient communities. So all issues to do with climate-smart livelihoods and food production systems are part and parcel of Room to Roam. Law enforcement is key. We will talk later on about if we have secure habitats which are empty, they won't survive, they won't be viable because they are shaped by the gardeners of this ecosystem, which are the elephants. So that's a key part of what we do. And then we continue to do research to check where the elephants are going. We also look at how you can supplement water in some of the areas that are genuinely lost. But as we do that, we use good science because you can easily, interference, too much of it can actually distort the balance of nature, which I talked about at the beginning. But the idea, ladies and gentlemen, is as we secure these species, as we secure viable populations of the iconic species, we can then use them as the assets to resolve our climate challenge. So climate change and biodiversity conservation are interdependent, and that is why we are here. And I really want us to thank all of you for being here and to work towards that goal, and happy to discuss later on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jamil. Friends, we have at the moment Her Excellency Paula Coelho, from the Secretary of State, as you know, for Climate and Sustainable Development. I'm sure she's familiar to most of you in the room already. But if you're not familiar with her, she has held several roles in Angola, being previously the Minister for Environment, Secretary of State for Biodiversity and Conservation Areas, and Secretary of State for Environment, and before that even Director for Biodiversity. So I think with several hats, she has served both biodiversity, climate change and sustainability, leading not just from Angola, but really for Southern Africa in many ways in the international arena. Later on, when we talk about wildlife crime, that's the next segment which we'll go on to. It's also very interesting to know that she's a person who's been awarded by Interpol, a person who's been awarded by the Chico Mendes Institute. So these are not things that normal bureaucrats get to do in life. So a person with several capabilities and achievements. But we'll come to the wildlife crime part later. Your Excellency, we had started really with elephants as the elephant in the room. Biodiversity is the elephant in the room. Nature is just getting into the COP, so to speak, in a sense for the first time in some significant manner. And we used the example of the physical elephant, and Jamil had just started out talking about the room to roam and the concept of protecting the elephants and thereby biodiversity and thereby the habitats, etc. But before, I'll give you 2 minutes to settle down, as I'm sure you walked in from one meeting to the other. So may I instead turn to John now. John, putting on now your hat of CEO of the Elephant Protection Initiative, what would you say? I mean, is there a direct link between elephants in Africa and climate change? Do you think that is the case? And or do you think the elephant can really serve as a flagship to wake us up to the broader issues of biodiversity and climate change?
Great, thanks Vivek, and good morning all. State Secretary, great to see you again. And thanks for the generous introduction. And that was a wonderful presentation, Jamil, so I'm not going to repeat that. I think this Room to Roam initiative is fantastic. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Elephant Protection Initiative, it is an intergovernmental initiative. It was launched in February 2014, and there are currently 24 African elephant range states who have joined the initiative. And these states have common policies when it comes to elephant conservation, in particular in relation to issues to do with international ivory trade, domestic markets, but increasingly addressing the issue of human-elephant conflict. We've heard from Jamil how the climate change is impacting that, because as weather patterns shift, the migratory routes shift and you get a lot more interference between elephants and humans. And we all love elephants, but they're big, they're hungry and they're thirsty. And there is competition for space and there is competition for resources. So we do see increasing levels of conflict and we do need to work together to avoid and mitigate that. But let me talk about first the role of elephants in the landscape. We've this week and for the last little while heard some brilliant presentations by a gentleman called Ralph Shami. And I think you're all familiar with Ralph Shami. He's co-director of, it's called Rebalance Earth. Yeah. Rebalance Earth. Now he's done work, he's firstly drawn on the science. And what does the science tell us about the forest elephant and the role of the forest elephant as an engineer in the ecosystem? And what the science says is that when you have a healthy population of forest elephants within the forest, the way in which they graze, the way in which they disturb the soil, etc., results in a healthier ecosystem that absorbs more carbon. So an ecosystem with forest elephants absorbs more carbon than one that has a depleted number of forest elephants. And what they've done is they've actually put a number on that. They've said, what does that mean in terms of real world numbers? And they have calculated that based on the current carbon market, each forest elephant has a value of 1.75 million over the course of its lifetime. And that's only based on the carbon benefit. And that actually, he said, is based on the earlier estimate of carbon price, and it's gone up. So it's probably over 2 million per elephant, just in terms of its carbon benefit. Now, how do you monetize that? That's a little bit difficult. So how do you, monetize that within a carbon market? And that's where they're working. But not only how do you monetize it, but how do you ensure the benefits go to local people? Because we all love elephants, but they can be rather difficult to live next door to, especially if you have crops, you have children that are going to school and are going across the migratory path. So how do you address this issue of human-elephant conflict? Now, that's critical, because if you want to maintain the support of local people, you have to show that you're putting them front and centre, working with them, and they are deriving a benefit. So I think we're getting into a space at the moment where, we've had a lot of science around elephants. We all love elephants, but we have to have a deep recognition of what it's like to live in close proximity to elephants, especially as human populations are expanding and there is that competition for resources. That's why finding a way in which local people can benefit from elephants in their surroundings directly from that is a way forward. So yes, I think there is a great opportunity to move forward here. There is a great opportunity to tap into the current discourse. And I'll just close with this, because I know we'll have a longer discussion later, is that what is absolutely clear is that we will in no way meet our climate mitigation targets if we are not protecting nature, managing nature and restoring nature. So that mitigation gap will only get larger if we deplete nature, which means that you have to go faster in dealing with manufacturing, transport, etc. But we can close that mitigation gap by better managing nature. So with that, I'll close, but we have a challenge, but we have some good opportunities there as well.
Thank you, John. That's very clear. I think you've laid the scene for the Secretary of State to give her opening remarks, because really, from being Secretary of State for Biodiversity to being Secretary of State for Climate Change, how much is the interlinkages that you think you can see? I'll get to his point about communities in a second, because he touched upon perhaps, ABC of this whole thing is action on biodiversity in communities, isn't it? And to find that link. But we'll come to communities in a second, but I just want your first thoughts on what you think is really that link between biodiversity and climate change, and using elephants as an example, because that's what you're talking about now.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thanks for giving me this opportunity, even though late, but to come as well, and good morning to you all. Well, I can just say that we don't need to try anything anymore. We feel the climate on our bones because we are alive from biodiversity. And if you allow me just to integrate ourselves within communities, even though you want to talk it a little bit later, I would just say that one of the things that we should do is to listen more to communities, because we are also going to go extinct. So if we don't change the way we do things, if we don't change, and if we do not consider communities or elephants as being part of heritage sites and geographic, very well considered, you can take the amounts you can put on a table, but this will not have any feedback or proper feedback if we do not consider both. And just for you to recall ourselves, 1992 we had a Rio Convention Pavilion, and this is the beginning. So just to say that I think it's time for us, even though we are having the first time exercise and nature is coming back into climate, it's time for us to start thinking the objectives of the Rio Conventions themselves. There is too many protocols, but they are all trying just to be specific on one of the issues that we feel at the moment is because of communities. Are we going to call within biodiversity our specific program for communities? If you look at elephant-man conflict, no, you're not going to. Maybe it's the way we live, it's the way we approach. So this is the link that we have. So we just have a very nice common debate within the Portuguese-speaking countries, where I would like also to share with you, which is what are we going to do now since we are having those impacts from climate change into biodiversity facing on nature-based solutions, okay? Carbon is just one, but here we are also discussing methane. And what about the impacts on this big species, which is elephant? What if it goes extinct? Then what are we going to measure? So this will be maybe my first comments on the linkage. They are not a link, they are within themselves, okay? Because we are also part of the ecosystem. Sometimes we talk about nature and we exclude man, but we need to put them really on top of the table because we are the one destroying this nature that we also talk about too much. So I'll end up here, and thank you for that first round.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think all three initial comments have set the stage for a broader discussion. Also to recognize that we are just joined by His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Salman Al-Hamadi, the Assistant Undersecretary for Biodiversity and Marine Life of the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment in the UAE. All that I know of you in introduction is that you are actually an agricultural expert with a PhD in agriculture. And for many years, he used to handle the agriculture portfolio in Abu Dhabi, if I remember right, and now handle the biodiversity sector in the ministry for the Emirates. So welcome.
Thank you very much.
I'm very happy that you're able
And
to join.
sorry for being late because I had another commitment, so I have to finish and come here.
I'm sure. I think people are running from one meet to the other in this COP as usual. So we're very happy to have a full panel now. Your Excellency, we had just finished talking a little bit about, we used elephant as an example, but basically on biodiversity and climate change. What is the nexus? How does one affect the other? And we touched upon communities a bit. Now that you're in the room, perhaps you would like to say how the UAE addresses this and what. I mean, the COP here has brought the Emirates in the center stage of climate change. But I was just telling the other panelists that perhaps it's the first COP when nature is coming into the COP. Maybe coming into the language eventually, but at least coming into the room. And people are talking about biodiversity at a climate COP and not at CBD and not at other biodiversity COPs that we are used to. So may I have your first comments as to what does it mean for UAE, this biodiversity and climate change? And do you, in this country especially, given your geography and your climate of this country, are you seeing actually a direct link between biodiversity change and climate change?
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I'm glad to be part of this remarkable discussion, and thank you for the introduction. And I was lucky to be in agriculture area, did my PhD, but I cover the part of soil and water environment of agriculture. So it's more related to the environment and the component of the environment. Let me first of all to welcome you all in the UAE, and allow me to take this moment to say congratulations for the remarkable achievements we have all achieved in COP28. To start, I would like to thank you for having me on this panel to discuss a crucial intersection of environment concerns, biodiversity protection and its role in addressing the impact of climate change. It is essential to recognize the interlink between biodiversity and climate change. Biodiversity, as we all know, is variety of life on Earth. It provides abundant ecosystem services that contribute to climate resilience and adaptation. The UAE, despite its arid landscape, is making a significant steps in protecting its unique biodiversity to confront the challenges posed by climate change. In marine conservation, The UAE has implemented several measures to protect its coastal biodiversity, the establishment of marine protected areas, and the promotion of sustainable fishing practices are vital components of the country's strategy. Healthy marine ecosystem systems not only support biodiversity, but also contribute to the climate change mitigation by sequestering carbon and maintaining the balance of ocean. In addition, the UAE has undertaken extensive mangrove conservation efforts to ensure not only protecting biodiversity, but also mitigating climate change through natural carbon capture. Let me share one notable initiative emphasizing our global role in climate change mitigation through nature-based solutions. The UAE launched the Mangrove Alliance for Climate, the MAC, in partnership with Indonesia to expand the cultivation of mangrove and to explore and exchange experience, knowledge between countries that serves as a natural carbon sinks, supporting in the preservation of coastal environments and ecological systems. And as of yesterday, this alliance has 38 countries on board. In addition, we are going to build an international mangrove research center in Bali, supported by the UAE in collaboration with our brothers and sisters in Indonesia. And the aim of that center is to explore the physiology, biology, ecology, entomology, and biotechnological of mangrove in order to make it more economically viable and try to expand the mangrove in other countries in the world. Mangrove in the UAE recognizes the threat of climate change-induced factors on coral reefs, such as rising sea temperatures. Hence, the UAE has implemented the Coral Reefs Rehabilitation Program for its protection and restoration. The UAE is constructing a large coral nursery which extends over an area of 300,000 square meters. This nursery will be home to 1.5 million coral reefs, highlighting the country's commitment to marine biodiversity and conservation. This initiative will contribute to climate resilience by supporting marine biodiversity and acting as barrier against coastal erosion. The UAE is actively using biodiversity protection as a crucial tool in its approach to addressing the impact of climate change through conservation, protected areas, marine protection, and many more. In the UAE also, we are making significant steps in safeguarding its unique systems by recognizing the interact links between biodiversity and climate. The UAE is not only contributing to global conservation efforts, but is also positioning itself as a leader in sustainable and climate resilience practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And so we have moved a little bit from elephants to marine life, to corals and mangroves, and had a idea of how life on both land and water are linked to climate change. But I don't want to lose the topic, Secretary of State, that you started with. It's community, right? Which is people, which is what eventually moves a number of delegates, a number of parties in a climate COP, are the people who are living on land. And we just talked about elephants. And in a sense, elephants are a good example, because elephants are wonderful animals to look at, and they are fabulous for tourism, and they're very good in terms of ecosystem, but they do have conflict implications on people. I come from a country where the conflict is probably the highest. 400 people are killed a year. So when you talk of conflict in Africa, I keep saying that Africa today should look at India today, because when you reach the human density population that we have, then the conflict levels here would, here as in Africa, would perhaps go to that level if we do not leave the passages, Jamil, that you talked about. There are so many different ways to address this. But can we, Jamil, because you started first on this, so let me start with you and say, how does IFAW's Room to Roam try to address this factor of trying to preserve what you said, 300,000 elephants, and so you must have them in Southern Africa, the savanna elephants, very good, but how are you going to address conflict, and does the project Room to Roam conceptualize that?
Yeah, and thanks, Vivek. And honestly, for IFAW, we say if we do not get communities on board and them being part of the solutions because they coexist with wildlife, we can never win to secure nature. So we have prioritized addressing human-wildlife conflict, and we literally have sought the advice of the communities themselves. What are the solutions? So that it is owned by them, they are on the ground. It's not about importing it from somewhere. We have also insisted on how do they benefit without having to encroach, because a lot of what happens is they're encroaching for the sake of trying to put food on the table. So we have to look at some viable options of making efficiencies on their livelihoods. Climate smart agriculture is a big thing, what we are doing now. And we started piloting that in the 3 Anchor landscapes I referred to, in Zimbabwe, in Malawi and Zambia, as well as in Kenya. We look at issues around energy, because lots of women do get maimed or even killed while they're fetching firewood. How do we make them, energy efficient stoves? And how do we get women, in particular, as the people that do the food production and run the households, to actively participate in the economy? That empowerment has helped to really improve community involvement in seeing wildlife. First of all, they're proud of it as a culture, as a tradition. It means a lot even from a taboo, from identity of clans. So they want to live with it, but whose wildlife is it, who is benefiting? And then last but not least, we are exploring how we can facilitate private community partnerships for businesses in tourism or any other value chains, that communities actually have a tangible role in terms of their land being an equity, and not just cleaning the lodges with tourism, but actually owning it and getting dividends and being part of the governance. So that's what we are looking at. It's not easy, but if you want to do easy things, you don't resolve climate, you don't save wildlife, you don't save biodiversity. So that's kind of what we are looking at, really.
Okay, brilliant. And John, would you have any thoughts on the same topic?
Yeah, no, very well said. And within the Elephant Protection Initiative Foundation, our colleague Greta F. Laurie, who's Ethiopian, has been leading this work, but we've developed a strategy where there are 3 pillars to the strategy. Mm-hmm. And the first one is fostering a high-level dialogue, because we must engage at the highest level and ensure that there's a recognition of the significance of this issue at a high level. The second is enabling local solutions, because the solutions must be local. You must consult locally and understand what the local conditions are. There are some technical responses to human-elephant conflict, but quite often there are many underlying social and social-economic issues that need to be addressed if you're going to find long-term solutions. So how do you enable a local solution that's going to be sustained over the long time because it has local buy-in and local support? And the third pillar is amplifying African voices. And this is about, we have to hear the voices of those people that are impacted here. So we have been sponsoring local journalists, for example, to bring forward stories about what is happening at a local level. So from fostering a high-level dialogue, enabling local solutions, to amplifying African voices is our framework. And we were just in an area in Ethiopia where Greta was. We worked with the Elephant Crisis Fund. And there was a particular problem with elephants encroaching on people's land, eating up their crops, their livelihoods. And what they needed to do is have some way of being alerted early enough so that they could, ward the elephants away. They have now torches, etc. So there's just 3 watchtowers that have been built that are, have staff there provided by the local agency, and they've got high-power torches, and so they can ward the elephants away. They also carry away the dung. because the elephants tend to go back where they can work where they were before. So if you can remove the dung, that also has an impact as well. So that's the way in which we're approaching it. As Jamel said, you know, and our colleagues from Gabon have said that if you can't address human-elephant conflict, you lose not only support for elephants, but for the whole biodiversity agenda, not only locally, but politically. So this is and what we're trying to achieve is harmonious coexistence. I think that's what we're striving for with elephants, but with wildlife more generally. How do we harmoniously coexist? So that's the approach of the EPL.
Yeah, that's great. And in fact, when you describe an elephant, whenever I describe an elephant, you know, to anybody, it's in 4 words. It's a big, even a child can tell you. But biologically, there's a definition of big. It's a mega herbivore, over 1,000 kilos. It eats that much, right? Intelligent, social, nomad. You must understand all these 4 words. And because it's big and it eats the amount it does, it has to be a nomad. It has to keep moving. But as it moves and it doesn't find place to eat, it might come into communities, come into conflict. So, Secretary of State, what is your experience in Angola? Is conflict increasing? Will climate change exacerbate conflict? Can you think that might happen? Is there a link there?
There is a link, and I would like to maybe pull back on a transnational type of program, which is the CASA, the Okavango Zambezi program. And as we all recognize that elephants, they need to eat, they are big, and also the size of, let's say, our conservation areas in Angola are big, and the numbers of elephants that we have, they are not really fulfilling the whole role. And then I will say we have touch-based places specifically where we can say we have the conflict, human-elephant conflict. But nevertheless, since we are all describing what are the main challenges, I would like maybe to bring up a correlation between species and the human. Because the problem now, to me, it's the scarcity of resources for us to share. We mostly talk about the increase of population, but suddenly we speak less and less about the population of the biodiversity, its impact and how it's going to get influenced. Our elephants, for instance, are mostly, we say, through playing and by DNA that they are in Botswana. But when they come to come, because they're still demining zones, I mean, there's still zones that need to be demined, and then we have a barrier there. But what I would address is that we are failing by just putting the programs now that will impact the social, because governments are also bringing up other issues within the agenda because of the budget is the same. So we need to find a new balance that will be based on what we are doing till now. We are really strongly, and we are sharing the Elephant Protection Initiative, but then we also touch issues on marine, but then I also need to say a report that said to me, but okay, we need to look at marine turtles because Angola is also the hotspots of some of those species in the Atlantic Ocean. And then you go like, okay, well, elephants, you know, they are there, they have food, but what about those that they take 100 life cycle to survive? So I think it's really important that communities come on board, but again, we need to make them alert that they should be the first, how do you say, can I call them rangers on the ground? Maybe at some point for our understanding.
Guardians of the wild.
Yes.
Yeah.
We need really to include them on the decision maker, but to give them responsibilities, okay? I'm not going to talk until we have maybe your supports yourselves in the room, support to have a standing, what you call that, a standing committee for communities at the COPs, so that they can speak themselves, and then we can hear, and then we have a platform, because Africa is facing that throughout, okay? And we also look at other regions, like where you're coming from, and we see correlations. We see countries like Emirates here, that we also they need to increase in population. But how much carrying capacity are we bringing on these movements, okay? This is also something that we should look at community level. In the language, they do not understand most of the things that we are discussing here. They say, okay, no, I saw an animal was like this, and tomorrow is this big. What does that mean to science, and how are we going to break down the language? So those are the principles that we should give them ownership, leadership, and allow them to make decisions. And then, of course, with all these social impacts that we name it here, I can assume from the panelists because it's the same platform that we are all in, and the basis of the ISHI targets and also policies are already there, but then we need to look at really in more detail on the ground. And I gave example of CASA because it's a transnational type of program, and the landscape, it accommodates most of the species, take into consideration the elephant. We are now exercising for the first time in the country, a project where biodiversity and climate change will be together, and also looking at the diversity because we have ravines in the park. But then let's see how are we going to address, because the main constraint that we thought it was climate, it became a water issue. So again, communities.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Al-Hamadi, you don't have elephants in the UAE, but you have the same problems possibly of communities and livelihood. And you've heard, Secretary of State talking about leadership of communities. John talked about giving them a voice. Jamiel talked about not making them just, get livelihood, but actually have ownership. I think my friend Simon in the room yesterday referred to the fact that it should not be livelihoods even, it should be well-being of communities, it should move to the next level. So all these concepts are there. How does the Emirates look at this in terms of biodiversity, conservation, and community well-being being lived? Maybe somebody has water in the room, I don't know. Stacey, could you get water? Yeah, somebody just give them unfortunately, there don't seem to be any official glasses or anything.
Keep it for a while.
Thank you. Thank you. We are in the UAE. Think of it, and I'll give you two examples. First example, when we talk about the nature-based solutions, we think of the environment that we want to create for the animals and biodiversity. The mangrove is a shelter for 341 endangered species. And when we expand the system, the mangrove system, we provide more shelters for more animals. This is the way we think of it. And we try to utilize our resources. The mangrove is naturally planted in the UAE, so we try to utilize these resources and put more efforts to expand and to protect and rehabilitate more areas. The second part of the example that we think of it in the UAE is the regulation that we adopt, and I'm sure that you know the initiative that we did with the Dubai port, the world port, and the Dubai police, that we use the AI technologies with X-ray that we do and all the shipment that came through Dubai to be exported outside the Dubai. And we had an innovation to X-ray all the containers to be sure that there is no hidden or forbidden animal products that they use Dubai to reship to another countries.
Yeah, no, that's very good that you actually gave that as a last example, because it takes us right into the next segue of wildlife crime, which is, I was waiting for the livelihood discussion to end and move into wildlife crime. So John, as you are sitting next to Dr. Al-Hamadi, and he talked about the AI or new technologies. We've been talking about wildlife crime, and you've been at the forefront in many ways of tackling international wildlife crime. But let's just move back and say, how important is tackling wildlife crime to climate sustainability? Is there a link there at all?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, because not everyone may be familiar with the scale or nature or consequences of these crimes. So if we look at the reports that have come out from the UN Office of Drugs and Crime, the World Bank and others over recent years, in terms of scale, it's industrial in scale. We're not talking subsistence poaching. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking industrial scale poaching of tens of thousands of animals and plants, driven by transnational organised criminal groups. Now, if you look at the statistics that are available, the UN Office of Drugs and Crime says that of the 40,000 species protected under international law through CITES, 6,000 of them are found in illegal trade. They go on to say that there are millions of species that are not protected under international law that are also found in illegal trade. And if you look at all wild animals and plants that are found in illegal trade, the value of that contraband is said to be $200 billion a year. But it's not the value of the contraband we're interested in the impact. And the World Bank says the impact of these crimes is valued at between $1 to $2 trillion. That's with a T, trillion dollars a year, based upon the impact that this is having on ecosystems. Because what happens, we know that nature can sequester over 50% of anthropocentric emissions of carbon. We know that nature-based solutions can provide up to a third of the mitigation we need between now and 2030 to reach the Paris agreements. That assumes that the ecosystems are functioning effectively, or with nature-based solutions that we are protecting them, enhancing them, or maintaining them. Now, what happens with illegal wildlife trade is that key animals that provide an essential service are being stolen at scale for illegal trade. Plants and trees that sequester carbon are being cut down. It is diminishing the capacity of the ecosystem to mitigate carbon. So that 50% figure and that 33% figure is going to go down to 40, to 30, to 20, to 33%, to 23, 15. Then where do you pick up the ability to mitigate? It means you have to go harder on transport, manufacturing, etc. You know, we are really having to focus on nature, because nature, we want it to go from 50 to 60 to 70. Nature-based solutions from 33 to 43. That also buys us some time with some of the other sectors where it's very difficult to make the change. And it is a low investment, high return area to be when you invest in nature. And if we can end wildlife crime, if we can stop this, because it doesn't benefit nature, it doesn't benefit local people or indigenous peoples, it actually robs them of the resources that they live amongst and rely upon. There are so many benefits here. You protect nature to sequester, your nature-based solutions work, indigenous and local peoples can benefit from the wildlife, and there are all sorts of other societal challenges that can be dealt with. So there is a direct nexus between wildlife crime, nature, and climate. And there is a great opportunity here for us to recognise that nexus, put more effort into ending wildlife crime, which will enable us to better mitigate. We can talk about the opportunities for an international agreement. I don't know if you want to talk about that now or later. There are also opportunities. The UAE is going to be hosting the UN Crime Congress in 2026. This is a great issue to put on the agenda for 2026. UAE has been leading here in terms of nature and the role of nature in combating climate change. So the great opportunity to put this on the agenda for a UN Crime Congress. And Angola's been leading the charge through their president for saying we need a new international agreement to prevent and combat wildlife trafficking. There's a complete void there now. There's no agreement there on how to prevent and combat these crimes as an additional protocol to the UN Convention Against Transnational Organised Crime. So we can agree as an international community, what are we going to do together to prevent and combat these crimes, not just for biodiversity, not just for climate, but also for local peoples, indigenous peoples. One last point. We've come out of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, I know there's some dispute about, or disagreement about the origins, but it most likely spilled over, it was a pathogen spilling over from an animal to a human. Even if you don't accept that, there are multiple examples of pathogens spilling over from wild animals to people and causing epidemics and pandemics. Now, when you have wild animals in trade, in illegal trade, they don't go through any biosecurity checks. We are exposing ourselves to a huge vulnerability for the next pandemic by not getting a handle on this illegal trade in wild animals that pose a risk to human health. They are going under the radar. They can carry a pathogen that can spill over to people, create the next pandemic. So there's another compelling reason to really scale up the effort to end wildlife crime for all of these reasons.
Fantastic, fantastic points, John. He has pointed now to your President, Secretary of State, who has taken a lead in wildlife crime, ending wildlife crime. It's such a hopeful thought, isn't it, that we'll stop wildlife crime. But even if you can't stop, how do you mitigate it? How do you bring it down to a scale that it does not diminish our biodiversity and it helps that resilience that he's talking about for climate change?
Thank you. This is a very, in a more operational way, tricky to answer. But I would say that we need to have something bounded to Interpol. They will put a little bit some of the other heads all together, just to see how are we going to typify those type of crimes. Indeed, Honorable President is pushing the protocol with the Malawi, Peru, Costa Rica, and other, Gabon, and other presidents. And we are having a very full support for the international community. And I also see, sorry, your doc, is it too many UN and some UN special agencies? Yeah. And also to address that this Congress that is going to come is, we need to really to look on how are we going to, is it sue a crime? How are we going to, because we don't want to have many people in jail. We need that people to come and work and provide food because we are too many in the country as well, okay? This is something that, this is a ball going around and around. But we need to typify what is crime under mitigation and what is crime under adaptation, okay? Let us a little bit, when you talk about crime, let us a little bit exclude poverty reduction, because who does the crime and who feeds the crime is nothing concerning about poverty reduction, okay? This is because of our African context where they say, no, they need to kill someone to eat. No, no, no. Government has specific programs to give support. We have a program that we give on monthly basis for communities to leverage their quality of life, since we also are fighting to graduate at some point in time according to the resources that we have. So this is the main concern of the presidency. This is why we called upon all prosecutors within Africa to discuss what are the measures that we should put together. And our colleague here also from UNDOC came and gave us support to be capacity building on legal staff, Ministry of Justice, and their co-relatives to understand what is it that we call wildlife crime, environmental crime, and all other boxes. So we need to understand the concept. And yet, here on the table, we look at what am I doing if also consciousness comes upon on those decisions, okay? This is why I start saying that is very tricky. But the president is having a good support. I must thank you again. And I will make a call that we should follow that. And if we are not getting there, we should keep on talking, discussing it, and we'll achieve things. Because we will disappear, and the problem will still be there because we are increasing the numbers. Are we going to report that the global outlook for biodiversity said the species are going down? But yet, what is the really true report saying that? Okay? There's a lot of gaps within many protocols that we are also looking and binding that. So the president will, I think, soon, I cannot say. Okay, there are things only big people say things. But soon we'll convene a meeting within SADC to further discuss those, and also to the community at economic level in Africa also to bring those, because he believes that under culture and peace, there must be a linkage, and that will be mitigation and adaptation, the linkage to the illicit trafficking. So the report is there, and I would much also to call upon to those who have yet responded to the questionnaire, please do so. Send it to us. We are also here being your secretariat for that. Don't be shy. If you want to do it anonymous, please do, but we also really want to address those issues to be and to have a basis in the consensus to the world on these linkages.
Thank you. And thank you for that bold statement. I mean, we don't really say link poverty to other organized crimes, do we? I mean, we don't say people are poor, so that's why they have drugs. No, we don't make that link, but we often make that link for wildlife crime when it comes to that. And we often confuse international illegal trade with subsistence, eating of animals. They're completely different things.
Yep.
But anyway, Jamil, can I turn to you and ask, IFAW is working on room to roam and corridors and stuff, but is IFAW also focusing on ending wildlife crime? And I have a hint that you perhaps do. And if so, what do you do?
I think I didn't say that. Yes, emphatically, we do prioritize law enforcement and wildlife crime to stop it. I think John and Cabinet Secretary did a good job articulating the impact and the connection to climate. And that is why we say if we secure the habitats and don't deal with combating illegal offtake, the habitats will be empty. And just going to the basics, when you address wildlife crime to combat it, you have to address it at all levels across, and along the entire chain. So as part of Room to Roam, we invest in ranger welfare, which is the men and women that are in the front lines and confronting the poachers that are often heavily armed. And what we have, in the past couple of years, often neglected is to ensure these men and women are well equipped in terms of even their accommodation. So we go to the basics. Do they have decent accommodation? And IFAW is investing in houses. Do they have decent recreational facilities? Do they have decent uniforms, good food for rations, transportation, and technology? So we do that across all the places we work. And then we also do support K9 units at exit ports and seaports as a way of trying to sniff out the illicit products. Then on the side of the market, we also do behavior change design, basically looking at what's the motivation of those that are buying the illicit products. And we have found out over the years that once they know exactly the impact in the source countries, they don't want. And that's why we have gotten to where we are now. So we have made progress. It's not yet success because they always find another way. Last but not least is the issue we deal with around facilitating interagency collaboration. The way governments work, the way NGOs work is we work in our silos, but how can we talk to each other and benefit from the collective? So for law enforcement to combat wildlife crime, we facilitate where governments invite us and are willing, coming together of the various law enforcement agencies so that you do not have somebody on the police side and those on the wildlife protection side not knowing what the other is doing, so that they can work together because that brings the resources together more efficiently. And then thirdly, it's about cross-border and regional collaboration. So all the various regional economic communities and even beyond Africa, we have talked about, and there are mixed results around wildlife enforcement networks. But the idea is it takes a collective across the globe to be able to deal with combating wildlife crime. And IFAW and our partners, when I say IFAW, we don't work alone, we work with other partners, including NGOs. We are fortunate to be across 40 countries in all the key regions, from Latin America, Caribbean, into North America, Africa, Southeast Asia, China. So we are able to almost be present or be privy to what's happening across the entire chain from the source through to the consumer market. And then another niche we offer is around combating the live animals seized in trade. There is a growing trade in these live, exotic pets. And when they are confiscated at ports, when they get there, they often end up in captivity or have to be euthanized. So we are working with a broad partnership group where we are developing how do you deal with these confiscated live animals? They are already left their original places. Can they be repatriated? What are the terms for that? The issues of permits, issues of diseases. So in a nutshell, IFAW prioritizes combating wildlife crime. And we also believe we don't do it just by technology, but community enforcement networks. The communities, they are the eyes. When we go through airports, we say, if you see something, say something. In the same vein, when communities where we work, we say, if you see somebody who is walking around, they're trespassing, they're stealing, they're not poor, it's not about food, say something, and then enforcement happens. So that's basically what we are doing.
Okay, thank you. And finally, on this topic, may I ask Dr. Al-Hamadi, we heard John say that Emirates will be hosting the next conference in 2026. I don't know whether that's official yet.
No, it's the UN Crime Congress 2026.
Yeah, the UN Crime Congress. So if so, I'm not entirely sure whether it's your ministry that's dealing with that. But nevertheless, I'd like you to say something if you have on this topic.
You may have more information, because we as a federal, we regulate and we work with our local government partners. And that conference will be organized in 2026 in Abu Dhabi. And I don't know, we'll see you, all of you and again in UAE. The conference will focus on, there is nothing yet about the theme, overall theme, but usually we like to bring such events in the UAE in order to share and exchange successful stories. And people from everywhere can benefit of this experience. Similar to what is going to be done after 2 weeks also, we are going to organize a biodiversity workshop for the MENA countries. The objective also is to bring all people to benefit of our experience and exchange experience. And yesterday, as Her Excellency, the Minister of Climate Change and Environment, announced that we just launched the updated strategy of our biodiversity in the UAE. And that strategy also highlights a lot of new initiatives for the biodiversity in general. So we believe on such events, scientific events is very crucial for to protect the biodiversity and to adopt technologies, innovations that will help us to protect the animals in general.
Okay, thank you. So I'm aware of time, and I think we should keep 10 minutes for questions at least, but I'm going to do one quick round of some concluding remarks, really, of maybe a minute or two each. And we'll start with Jamil again, and then we'll come down, because I want Secretary of State to have the last word on this, which is what, because we're at a COP, and we're going to go very soon, in a year, back to another COP, right? What do you think should be done between this COP and the next, whether in your countries or as an international community? What's the one thing that you think is most important to solidify this nexus that we're talking about of biodiversity and climate change, and make sure at the next COP we get biodiversity further into the discussions and further into the room? So what's that one thing that you would like to see, either that you would think that your organization or your country would do, or what you would like to see done between this COP and the next? Jamil, you start from there.
So I think for me and for us as an organization, we would want the momentum that's been building up now and being talked about even in this room and in this COP of why nature is important as part of the climate solution. And part of that momentum should include harnessing the broad base of all financiers or people that are interested to support, because one of the challenges that is obtained to date is we have put more money in climate solutions that don't link to conservation. So there is a serious funding gap to secure the biodiversity. So we need to up that funding. 700 billion shortfall. I would want to say between now, let's get the conversations going and have a few early adopters that put money, walk the talk, so that by 2030, we start saying nature counting for climate solution.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Dr. Mohammed.
Yes. For us, we believe that we need to do more awareness. And I will give you an example of the UAE, that we have a lot of so many NGOs and entities who work with and biodiversity and environment in general. And we lack of the awareness, like a comprehensive program, a plan, a annual plan to collect all these efforts under one umbrella to guide them toward the right direction, toward the educating people about the importance of such biodiversity, and to also tell them what's the wrong that they are doing. The second part is the education, and I believe COP, maybe you noticed that this COP, as His Excellency Sultan Al Jaber says, we will not left anybody behind. So we bring the health on board, and the education, the youth, and we may need to invest more in education, and if any efforts that we will spend now, we will save a lot of efforts and money, and will save a lot of money in the future with the new generation that will become later.
Thank you. John, your final comments.
Thanks. And I'd like us to build on the momentum of this COP to address this issue of convergence. And there's a convergence between biodiversity and climate. And so we want to see biodiversity spoken in climate COPs, climate spoken about biodiversity COPs. We have a desertification COP coming up in Saudi Arabia at the end of this year. It should be talking about biodiversity and climate and desertification. We have the UN Convention Against Transnational Organised Crime will be meeting. They need to talk about wildlife crime and the impacts of that on climate and biodiversity, as well as other crimes that affect the environment. And we have a pandemics agreement under negotiation at the moment in Geneva. It's very important that they recognise the link between wild animal trade markets and consumption and the spillover of pathogens to people and the potential for pandemics. So they need to talk about these issues. So what we need to do is crack open these silos and have conversations on these issues that are so critical to humanity, but address them across all functions: public health, animal health, crime, biodiversity, climate, desertification. Then we will really get momentum going and shift the needle.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Secretary, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I will just maybe add something on to John, which
Sure.
is Ramsar also coming
Yeah.
very soon, and it's also part of the nature base.
Sorry to my colleagues at Ramsar and Convention on Migratory Species
Yes.
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, just to provoke and say that it really needs a mainstreaming approach. But if I can recommend and propose, and taking it for granted that we have, let's say, a COP president on the panel, that the recommendations that we are making on this panel should be attached to the last report of the COP. And that should be addressed to the government, and then that will be the basis for us to continue the discussions. Because we were concentrating on elephants, and then we end up talking about wildlife. But we saw there is a lot of linkages and connectivity of different topics, that each one already has its own box. So if we have this as an annexus, it can be annexus 5, I don't mind. But if you can just deliver to the president of the COP to say that side events reports are really accountable and part of the solution, that will be really a super bonus for us.
I think that's a fantastic point, isn't it?
Yeah, and my last comment would be, when it comes to illegal wildlife trade, I forgot just to say that we also look at documentation, because sometimes we work with ports, we work with immigration, but documentation is also a key part of the illegal trade issues. So with that, I will end my wishes.
Thank you very much. I think I've given homework for us to do in terms of recording this, and perhaps Dr. Mohammed has given you some homework to carry this to the COP presidency as well. But yeah, definitely we'll try to make that happen so that is officially recognized. So thank you, everybody. But we must leave some time for questions. So we've got 10 minutes, really. And if there are any questions here, I also recognize that somebody here is tracking virtually. There are questions coming on Facebook. I can't see people there, but I'm presuming somebody might ask if there's any virtual questions as well. But first, from the audience, I can see questions apiece. Straight to UNODC to begin with. I can see 3 questions already.
The topic is good.
That's good.
Thank you. And thank you all for the excellent presentation. I think that from what we hear, the link on the mitigation aspect of climate to crime is quite clear, and you all did an amazing job at explaining it. I think that what is sometimes less explained is the fact that also the adaptation to climate change has implications on crime. The wildlife-human conflict is one, zoonotic diseases, but the poverty, the food insecurity caused by climate generate further crime. It doesn't have to be necessarily environmental crimes. It can be migration that leads to illegal migration. It can be drugs. It can be human trafficking. It can be terrorism, all coping mechanisms for people that are affected by climate change. So the link is not only crime climate, but is crime climate crime. Again, it's a sort of a vicious cycle. But somehow the word crime never features in the official documents of COPs. So what do you think could be done as for parties that negotiate the final documents of COP? What do you think can be done for the next COP to have the word crime featuring at least once? Because so far it has not been possible. Thank you.
Okay, that's an interesting one. I don't know which one of you wishes to take that up.
Can I go? I think
Sure.
they are looking for government.
Party, yeah.
Yes,
Yes,
a
yes.
government party to
Absolutely.
that. Okay. We don't want to offend anyone at the international forum. And we do understand and acknowledge that crime is related to extremely bad things. This is where it comes, because if you work on a transfrontier place and they'll say, okay, my neighbor, let's say just Zimbabwe because he's here, okay, just for precautionary approach. Okay? Like, if I'm strictly neighbored with Zimbabwe, okay, and I see a poacher is from Zimbabwe, what will I do? You see, this is when comes this transnational. So I think this is a very good starting point where crime is addressed, nature is addressed. This is why my appeal is that these side events, they should bring something to the final documents of a COP or a meeting, so that this word, okay, even if tomorrow legal will soften the word for its meaning somewhere, there is always meaning for a common understanding, but that will be the beginning. And I think we are starting the conversation because we bring the topic here, and here we are as governments also to give feedback onto those things. Not the final ones, but at least for the topics that we are raising here today. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Let's move the needle slowly slowly and diplomatically towards
Yes.
that. Absolutely. Sir, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Just two very, very small questions. Maybe the first one is to John. I think it's difficult to talk about elephants and not talk about CITES at the same time. I remember at CITES COP19 in Panama, there was a proposal for the possible establishment of a subcommittee for rural communities to try and make sure communities are represented at the possible highest level within CITES structures. And there was disagreement among its African countries. So in your elephant protection initiative, are you discussing this and possibly uniting African countries on this very important subject of having a structure within CITES for communities? Number two, again on communities. I think almost all of you mentioned communities somewhere, including Jimmy, and traditional knowledge. How far are you willing to treat traditional knowledge or advice from communities at the same par as science or outcomes or findings generated by conventional science as a possible source of advice? That we talk so much about traditional knowledge, but do we really implement advice from that traditional knowledge and give it as much respect and treatment as findings of from traditional research findings, using the known methods? Thank you.
Yeah, very, very good question. So I think one is directly addressed to you. John, maybe you can take that up first.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. And every convention tends to have its own way of doing things. And as you know, CITES has a particular history. And for those who don't know, CITES, 184 countries are party to it. It's a convention that deals with wildlife trade, regulating legal and sustainable wildlife trade. It has three committees: a standing committee, a committee that deals with plants, and a committee that deals with animals. And the discussion is, should it have a committee that also addresses the voices of local communities? Yeah, because there is a feeling within CITES that local community voice is not finding its way into the conference of the parties. The issue is, and I think that's true. I was Secretary General of CITES for 8 years, and I'd often talk to people. It's very hard to get a local voice into the COP, and large NGOs are very effective because they're well-resourced and they can be there and express themselves. States obviously are. But how do you hear a local voice? I think some examples, I think the Inuit in Canada were very effective in bringing their voice to the COP on issues to do with polar bear. I think at the last COP I was involved in directly in South Africa, the South African delegation included local people on their delegation, and they gave them the microphone to let them speak directly to the parties, so that that voice was heard. It's not enough, and there is a difference of opinion at the moment amongst parties. How do you bring that local voice? Do you institutionalise it within a committee? And if so, what would be the composition of that committee? Who can speak for the community? If you're talking a global community, communities right across the globe, that's an open question. And as I think you did, Secretary of State raised that about the standing committees discussing that at the moment, and they haven't yet resolved it. What I would say is this: whatever institutional model is chosen, a committee or something else, I don't think CITES has been as effective as it should be in hearing a local voice. I think the Convention on Biological Diversity has been more successful in that regard. I think CITES is trying, but it's not yet there. So, yeah, which institutional model I think we could have a long discussion about. Is it best doing it through a committee, or is there another way of doing it?
Excellent.
But we're agreed we need to find a way to do it.
Yes, you can comment on that, and perhaps also take the next question as to whether traditional knowledge is something to be respected like a good fairy story, and then science is eventually followed, or are there equal weightages going to be given at some stage? Both, madam.
Both. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say that we have a very good example in Africa, that is the Honorable Chief Sharumbira, which is the chief leader in African Union. And is the only chief so far that I know, okay, my concern, which is a member of parliament, Pan-African parliamentary, that I met him because of the discussions on communities and traditional knowledge involved. Nagoya is not getting its way out anymore because we are stuck on many other issues, especially the impacts on climate change. But I think if we can use a voice to be heard, this is one open door, which means that there was a meeting on the heads of state this year in February at African Union headquarters, where the declaration itself gives orientation to countries in Africa to have a direct talks within other regions to talk about and bring communities. So we have a job here to say, especially the advocacy. There is also this African Worldwide Foundation, IWC, with Ricardo Simbunya, that is also one of the foundations at the international level that also brings a lot of issues on communities. I think this is something that we need to consider, because cultural ways of living that we have in Africa and the other parts of the world are completely different, okay? I'm not talking about the use of a teeth of a lion or a skin of that. This is another cultural thing, because the way we use for survival and we preserve that within conservation, okay? This needs to be also clear. But we also would like to say that the voice is heard, and also to see what is it, my behavior within my community, and when I come to Dubai. So now I must wear nicely. So this is also adaptation that we should also bring into consideration on those matters. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Wonderfully put. I'll take the last question from the floor, and then maybe if there's a question from our virtual audience, one last. But yeah, go on.
Thank you to all the panelists for this very interesting discussions. It's great to see this link between biodiversity, climate, and obviously people. But I was wondering whether the actual elephant in the room is not where the fund to make all of those great promises happen should come from. You raised that, for instance, that we need more investment. And I was wondering where focuses of different governments are maybe slightly elsewhere. Who should pay for all of that? Because that's probably where we need to push stronger.
Very good question. Who would like to take that up?
Well, the party should talk, but if you want, I can just, Secretary, a quick one is, I think it's all sectors in the global community, because remember the context of our discussion is we want to save the planet, we want to save ourselves, we are dependent on nature, we have to invest in nature, and we have to invest equitably. So I'll end there, but Secretary.
Yeah, are you ready to consider all that we just said and propose to become a humankind from a common house? Are you ready for that? Sure. Can I write it down? Okay. Because this is the way to go, okay? Because how strong is strong that you want to pull, okay? I have a little bit a way, you see, this is now, I'm not a diplomatic person, but it's a little bit rude. Because if I say something, they call me and they say, no, Paula, this happened, this, do you know what I say? Before I think, I said, okay, put him in jail, okay? This is the same, how strong you want to be on those matters. So when we come together to discuss this, it's because I want to hear you and I want to understand yourself. But you need to come ready and say, I will also listen to other people and I should find a common position on that. And this is how strong we need to be. Because if you say, no, I'm going to impose that on this, then let us just go for humankind and all be soft and have really principles that will bring us together. Because otherwise it's a very sensitive issue, okay? It doesn't have to be only with us in the room. It has to be with the bilateral relationship. It has to be my personal relationship. And on top of that is my understanding. What is it that, for instance, Angola, the Constitution says that we all need to preserve and this for the future generation. I am a future generation of someone, and yet I'm fighting climate change. You see, so those are the things I understand is a very important question. But allow me to tell you that myself, Paula, I'll take that with me to digest more, and then maybe on another opportunity also to bring a little bit more for discussion. Thank you.
Okay, friends, I'm being reminded that we have 50 seconds to end the thing, so I think we are absolutely on time. So I want to thank all our panelists for such a wonderful exposition. We'll give them a big hand. And thank you, all of you, for coming to listen. And thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Do we, Kinder or somebody, can we do a photo at the end and then we go off? Just to remember this panel.
Really, really appreciate
Our
that.
pleasure.
Excellent panel.
We hope to see you again.
I will be back, and I'm flying to Australia.